Montana Territory, early spring of 1879. The wind howled through the bare cottonwoods as snowmelt rushed down from the peaks. In the middle of it, in a town called Three Pines, a woman ran down the center of Main Street with her dress soaked and her boots caked in mud. "They took my boy," she gasped, stumbling through the swinging doors of the saloon. The room fell silent, cards dropped, boots scraped back from tables, but only one man moved. Tall and dust-worn, with a rifle strapped across his back and a silver buckle catching the lantern light, he stood from the far corner. His name was Thayer McGraw, and folks knew him for riding alone and never asking questions he did not need answered. He walked straight to her, his voice low but certain. "Then we ride tonight." Zadie Jameson nodded, chest heaving, eyes wild from crying. "They went north. 2 men took Franklin from the field. I saw them. One had a scar down his neck." Thayer took her by the arm, not rough but steady. "You got a coat?" She shook her head. "Get one. I will get the horses." She turned back out into the street, her legs trembling. She had not even looked him in the eye until now. But when she finally did, she saw something in him that made her breathe again, a man who did not blink at trouble, who would not ask her to calm down, or wait until morning. He already had his saddle cinched before she came back with her father's old duster thrown over her shoulders. He handed her a rifle. "Can you shoot?" "I can aim," she said. "That will do." By nightfall, they were already 10 miles out, following wagon tracks and hoofprints that cut through the pine forest. Zadie rode close behind, clutching the rifle tight against her chest. Her boy, her Franklin, was only 7. He had been playing near the creek that morning, chasing frogs and turning rocks. Then he was gone. "Why are you helping me?" she asked as they crossed a shallow stream under moonlight. Thayer did not look back. "Because I was taken once. No one came for me." She blinked at his words, her throat tight. They made camp for an hour near dawn, just enough to water the horses and eat a handful of jerky. Zadie sat near the fire, her fingers shaking as she held the tin cup Thayer handed her. He sat across from her, quiet, watching the flames. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. He did not answer right away. He tossed another stick into the fire, then looked up. "My mother died when I was 6. My father drank himself blind. A man came through our farm, said he would take me to work in Kansas. I believed him." Zadie did not speak. She just watched him, her heart thudding. "I ran 6 years later," he finished. "I am sorry," she said. He gave a small nod, then stood. "We ride in 15 minutes." They moved fast through the next stretch, following tracks that veered off into a canyon. Midday sun filtered down through narrow rock walls, and the silence felt tighter there, like the land was holding its breath. Thayer pulled up suddenly, raising a hand. Zadie stopped beside him. "Down there," he said, pointing to a smudge of smoke rising just beyond the ridge. They dismounted, tying the horses in the brush. Thayer led the way, rifle drawn. Zadie crouched behind him, heart pounding so loud she swore they could hear it. Peeking over the ridge, they spotted the camp. 2 men, a wagon, and tied to a tree a small boy in a red shirt. "Franklin," Zadie gasped. Thayer caught her arm before she could move. "Wait, we do this right." "I cannot. You will get him back," he said, his voice like steel. "But not if they hear us coming." She nodded, breath shaking. They circled wide, moving through the brush. Thayer handed her a revolver. "You keep this on them if they move. You see your boy run, you grab him. I will deal with the men." Zadie's hands trembled, but she took the gun. Thayer moved like water, silent and fast. When he was close enough, he stepped out with his rifle raised. "Drop your guns." The men spun in surprise. One reached for his belt. Thayer fired once into the air. The sound cracked through the canyon, echoing like thunder. Both men froze. "Next one goes between your eyes," he said. Zadie ran. Franklin's eyes widened when he saw her. "Mama!" She fell to her knees, cutting through the rope with shaking hands. He threw his arms around her, sobbing into her shoulder. "I got you," she whispered, holding him tight. "I got you." Thayer tied up the men and shoved them into the empty wagon. "They will hang in 3 pines," he said. Zadie held Franklin close as they rode back, her arms wrapped around him on the saddle. She looked up at Thayer, riding beside them. "Thank you," she said. He tipped his hat. "You are tougher than you look." She smiled faintly. "You are softer than you act." They made it back by nightfall. The sheriff took the men. Franklin fell asleep in Zadie's bed, his thumb tucked under his chin. She stepped out onto the porch and found Thayer sitting on the steps, staring out into the dark. "You do not have to stay," she said gently. "I know," he said, "but I want to." Zadie sat beside him. "You saved my boy." He turned to look at her, his face tired but warm. "You saved him too." There was a long, quiet moment. Then she reached out and put her hand over his. He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her. "I never had a place to go," he said. "But this feels like one." Zadie's throat tightened. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "Stay, Thayer," she whispered. "With us." He nodded slowly, his hand tightening on hers. "I will." The snow had finished melting, but the earth still held the chill. Morning sun found its way through the lace curtains of Zadie's kitchen, where a pot of coffee hissed softly over the stove. Franklin sat at the table, tracing his finger along a knot in the wood, his hair sticking up in tufts from sleep. Thayer stood near the back door, hat in hand, watching the horizon through the glass. He hadn't said much since returning the day before, but his presence filled the small house in a way Zadie hadn't known she needed. She poured 2 mugs and set one beside him. "You planning to be gone long?" she asked. He took the mug, eyes still on the fields. "Just over to the West Ridge. That's where the horses broke trail. I want to see how far the tracks ran." "Tracks from the men. Hooves that didn't match theirs." "Fresh, too." Zadie's hand froze on the coffee pot. "You think someone else was with them? Could be. Could be someone waiting out there." Franklin looked up, his voice small. "Will they come back?" Thayer turned away from the door. "Not while I'm here." Zadie set her mug down, then crouched beside her son, brushing his bangs from his forehead. "I've got to go into town," she said. "Mrs. Halpern's taking in laundry again, and I owe her a few shirts from last month." "Do you want me to ride with you?" Thayer asked. She stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "No. You check those tracks. I'll be back before noon. Franklin'll stay with Mabel across the road." Thayer nodded once, then stepped out, the screen door creaking behind him. By the time Zadie reached town, the wind had shifted west. Dust swept along the road, and the smell of ash clung faintly in the air, a reminder of the fire that had taken the DeWitt barn the week before. She led her wagon to the side of the mercantile and stepped off, arms full of linen. "Mrs. Halpern stood waiting at her stoop, thick hands smoothed over her apron, her hair pinned tight beneath a kerchief. "Zadie Jameson," she called. "I heard about Franklin. Praise be he's safe." Zadie passed her the shirts, folding them one by one onto the bench. "He's shaken but strong. He spent the morning drawing in the dirt like nothing happened. You're lucky that Cowboy came through. What's his name again?" "Thayer McGraw." Mrs. Halpern squinted. "That the same McGraw who used to ride with the Deverell crew?" "The ones that got run out of Helena." "I don't know about that," Zadie said calmly. "Well, if he is, you'd best keep your wits. Men like that carry ghosts." Zadie's jaw tightened. "We all carry something." She left before more could be said, climbing back onto the wagon. The road home passed through low hills and yellowing grass where the first prairie crocus had begun to bloom. She let the reins slacken, her thoughts drifting. Back at the house, Franklin was playing with sticks by the well, and Mabel sat on the porch shelling peas. Zadie thanked her, then walked around to the barn. Thayer's horse wasn't in the corral. She waited. Noon came and went. By mid-afternoon, she'd fed Franklin and cleaned the hearth, but still no sign of him. She tried not to let it grow in her chest, that old ache, the one that whispered of departures and people who didn't stay. When the sun dipped low, she heard hooves at last. She stepped out, wiping her hands on her skirt. Thayer rode in with his hat pulled low and his coat dusty from riding. Without a word, he dismounted and tied his horse, then walked toward her. "I found the prints," he said. "3 riders. They split near the ridge. 2 went southwest, 1 doubled back." Back where? Toward the Flathead Trail. Could be nothing. Could be someone watching the town. Zadie folded her arms. "You think they were paid?" "I don't think they were working alone." From inside the house, Franklin called out. Thayer glanced toward the open window, then looked back at her. "You need to be ready. In case they return." She studied him, the way his eyes stayed steady even now. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I didn't ask you to." They stood in the quiet for a long moment. The evening light softened the lines on his face, the ones that hadn't been there when he was a boy. She wondered if he'd ever had someone to come home to before. "You fix fence?" she asked finally. He raised an eyebrow. "I can." "Then you can earn your keep. North pastures sagging." Thayer gave a small nod. "I'll see to it after supper." Zadie turned to go, then paused. "You eat beans and salt pork." "I've eaten worse." She smiled without showing teeth. "Supper's in an hour. Don't wander." Later, when the table was cleared and Franklin had been tucked into bed with a tin soldier clutched against his chest, Zadie stepped out onto the porch. Thayer was there, sharpening a blade by lantern light. "Fence'll hold," he said without looking up. She leaned against the post, arms crossed. "I heard what Mrs. Halpern said." He stopped sharpening. "She said you rode with Deverell." "I did. For a time." "Why'd you leave?" He looked up at her, the light catching the edge of his jaw. "They started taking more than cattle." She nodded once. "That's enough for me." He set the blade aside. "I never thought I'd stay anywhere longer than a season." Zadie walked over, sat beside him on the step. The night air was cool but not bitter. "You never had a boy sleep with his boots on and forget to feed the chickens." He chuckled low in his throat. "No." She turned her face toward his. "You're not just passing through, are you?" He met her gaze. "Not anymore." Zadie reached out, resting her hand over his heart. "Then stay as long as you want." He covered her hand with his. "I was already planning to." Zadie stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled to the elbow, arms damp from scrubbing. The dish basin on the table still steamed, but her mind had wandered far from soap and tinware. Through the open window, she watched Thayer in the yard, bent over a loosened gate hinge, his frame outlined by the last strokes of evening light. He'd been working steady since sunrise, mending what the wind and time had taken, speaking only when something needed saying. But she'd noticed the way he paused sometimes, eyes drifting toward the woods that bordered the north edge of the land. Like he was tracking something that hadn't made itself known yet. She stepped out, drying her hands on the hem of her skirt. "Gate won't hold through the next thaw," Thayer said without turning. "You think it'll come early? Smell in the air says so." Zadie rested her shoulder against the post and looked out over the pasture. "They always said March was a liar, promises spring, keeps its hands in winter's pockets." Thayer's mouth twitched like he might say something more, but didn't. He finished hammering the hinge into place, then stood and brushed his palms clean on his trousers. "I saw a smoke line this afternoon," he said. "North Ridge, too small for a fire crew. You think it's them?" "I think whoever paid them might want what they didn't get." Zadie crossed her arms tight over her chest. "Then we don't sleep light." He nodded, glancing toward the house. "Where's Franklin?" With Mabel. She asked for help hauling water, kept him busy. Good, he'll sleep better. She hesitated, then stepped closer. You've been looking toward those trees all day. What are you carrying? Thayer's jaw moved once before he answered. My brother rode with those men. Not the ones who took Franklin, but the same kind. Same kind of work, same kind of trail left behind. Zadie's voice dropped. And what happened to him? Last I heard, he was down near the border. Took a bullet from someone who didn't want their daughter stolen. She didn't speak. The wind tugged at her apron strings and the chickens rustled in the yard behind them. I never went looking for him, Thayer said finally. Didn't figure I'd like what I'd find. You don't owe him anything, she said. I know. But it don't stop the weight of it. Zadie reached out and touched his arm, light but steady. You've been carrying that weight a long time. He met her eyes, and something in him shifted, not softened exactly, but eased, like a knot loosening just enough to breathe around. Later, after Franklin returned and the lamps were lit, Thayer sat at the kitchen table, oiling the rifle he'd used the night they'd found the boy. Zadie handed him a plate of cornbread and beans, still warm from the hearth. Franklin asked if you were staying for good, she said. Thayer looked up. What did you say? I told him you were building fence. He gave a quiet laugh, then folded his hands around the tin plate. That an answer? It's the one I had. She sat across from him, fingers laced around her teacup. You won't have to run anymore if you don't want. This land's nothing special, but it's enough. I don't know what I'd be staying in one place. You'd be a man with a roof, a boy who looks up to you, a woman who wants you near. He kept his eyes on hers, the silence hanging long between them. Then he set the plate aside and reached across the table, his hand closing over hers. I could be that, he said, voice low. She turned her hand in his, palm to palm. Then stay, not just through this trouble, for everything after. He nodded once, thumb brushing the edge of her wrist. I will. Outside, the wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine smoke. Inside, the house held warmth not just from the fire, but from something steadier, something earned and quiet and whole. And when Franklin stirred in his sleep, murmuring from a dream, it was Thayer who rose to check on him, his steps sure and soft down the hallway. Rain had come in the night, soft and steady, tapping against the roof and soaking the earth until it turned to velvet underfoot. By morning, the sky was a pale, washed gray, and the smell of wet sage drifted in through the open windows. Thayer stood in the barn, sleeves rolled, shoulder pressed to the stall post as he watched the mare chew slow on her hay. A new foal had come just before dawn, slick and trembling, legs too long for its own good. Zadie had woken him with a lantern in her hand and urgency in her voice, not fear, just the kind that rose when something delicate needed care. She came in now, skirts lifted from the damp straw, and touched the colt's side gently. He's nursing now, she said. Thayer nodded. He'll make it. Zadie looked over at him, her hair pulled back with a twist of rawhide. I couldn't have managed that birth alone. You would have found a way. She didn't answer that. Outside, the hens called from the coop, impatient for feed. Franklin's voice rang out across the yard. He was with Mabel again, helping her with the milk cow while Zadie worked the barn. Thayer stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. I've been thinking about the road north. Zadie's brow furrowed. You mean the trail where you saw the smoke? I think we should ride it, not to chase anything, just to see where it leads. She leaned against the stall rail. You think someone's still out there? I think people who don't get what they came for sometimes come back worse. She was quiet a moment, then said, If we leave, Franklin stays here, with Mabel. Thayer's eyes met hers. I wouldn't ask it otherwise. They saddled their horses after supper, riding out before the light was gone entirely. The land stretched long and open, wet grasses brushing their boots, puddles shining like mirrors in every low spot. After an hour, Zadie pulled her horse beside his. "You ever think what it'd be like if you hadn't come through 3 Pines?" He didn't look at her right away. "I'd still be wandering, I guess, still waiting for something to pull me west." She tilted her head. "And now, I ain't waiting anymore." They rode in silence a while, the leather of the saddles groaning with the motion, the only sound aside from the breeze threading through the grass. When they neared the ridge, Thayer raised a hand and slowed. He dismounted, leading his horse by the reins, crouching near an old fire pit blackened with ash. "2 riders camped here," he said. "Wasn't recent, but not more than a week." Zadie knelt beside him. "They leave in a hurry. No time to bury the coals proper." "Might have been scared off." She glanced up toward the tree line. "Could be they saw you riding up this way before. Could be." He walked a tight circle around the site, scanning the mud. One of them was heavy, left a deeper boot print. The other dragged their right foot a little. Zadie stood, brushing her hands off. "That doesn't sound like someone coming back to fight." "No, sounds like someone running out of places to hide." They rode back slower, letting the horses pick their way around the soft ground. The moon broke through the clouds halfway home, turning the field silver. Zadie leaned forward in her saddle. "I never told you what Franklin's father was like." Thayer didn't press. He waited. "He was a blacksmith, hands like tree bark. He died of fever when Franklin was 4. We buried him out near the willow grove where the ground stays soft." Thayer spoke low. "You miss him." "I miss the steadiness. He wasn't a man for laughter, but he never left a job half done." They rode on. Then Zadie said, "You don't have to fill his place." "I'm not looking for that." Thayer turned toward her. "What are you looking for?" "Someone who stays when the work's not finished." He nodded once, just once, and they didn't speak again until they reached the yard. Franklin was already asleep, curled up on the cot beside the stove in Mabel's parlor. Zadie kissed his forehead and pulled the quilt higher, then followed Thayer out to the porch where the rain had begun again, soft enough to whisper against the roof. He sat on the top step, legs stretched out, hat in his hands. "You ever think about leaving again?" she asked, her voice barely above the rain. "Not since I saw you run into that saloon," he said. "You looked like someone who'd already lost too much." "I couldn't let her lose more." Zadie sat beside him. "You've seen more than most men I've known, but you carry it quiet, like it's not yours to speak." "Maybe I was waiting for someone to ask." She looked over at him, her voice roughening. "So I'm asking." Thayer turned toward her, and in the hush between them he reached for her hand, not tentative, certain, their fingers laced there on the step, the rain falling steady around them. "I've never stayed anywhere long enough to be needed," he said. "You're needed here." He nodded, the weight of it settling into him like a seed finding soil. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let his cheek rest there just for a moment. Nothing hurried, nothing loud. Just the sound of rain, and the knowing that neither of them would be alone again. By late April, the ground had firmed, and green returned to the hills in slow, cautious patches. A single calf had been born to the old red cow, and Franklin named it Clover without asking permission, which Zadie took as a good sign. He'd started sleeping through the night again, and his drawings, once full of men with rifles and frightened horses, now showed fences and the crooked barn, and a man with wide shoulders mending things. Thayer had built a new coop door and started shaping a corral from the broken rails behind the storage shed. He moved through the days like a man who'd lived here always, but Zadie noticed things: the way he still checked the western tree line before dusk, the way he kept his rifle close, even while shaving on the porch. He hadn't spoken again of riders or trails, and she hadn't asked. One morning, after Franklin had run off to help Mabel churn cream, Zadie found Thayer in the small room off the kitchen. the one that had held her sewing table and a few boxes of her husband's things. He was standing near the window, holding a folded shirt in his hand. "I can clear this out," she said, "if you're needing space." "I already moved my saddle in," he said, setting the shirt down. "Figured that was answer enough." She leaned against the door frame. "You're not waiting for something else to pull you away." "No. Just waiting for you to say it plain." She stepped in, voice quiet. "I want you here. Not for chores, not just for Franklin. I want you." He stepped toward her with the same calm he fought with, steady and deliberate. "Then I'm home." They stood close, the light catching in the fine dust between them. She reached up and touched the edge of his jaw, her thumb grazing the scar near his temple. "You're not what I expected," she said. "And you're the only thing I ever wanted," he answered. She kissed him, slow and sure, and he kissed her back with both hands at her waist, like he'd been waiting his whole life for something to feel this solid. That night, they ate supper outside, the sky streaked with color and the air warm enough to leave the windows open. Franklin tugged at Thayer's sleeve between bites, asking how far he'd ridden when he was young, and Zadie watched them both with a quiet fullness pressing at her chest. She hadn't known peace could feel like this, not loud, not grand, just a slow, unfolding kind of right. A week passed, then another. The garden was turned, the fence mended, the days long enough now for Franklin to run barefoot without complaint. Thayer built a bench beneath the cottonwood where the breeze came through strongest, and Zadie brought out a quilt for it one evening, pressing it into his hands. "I stitched it after Franklin was born," she said. "Never had reason to share it before." He unfolded it carefully, then sat and pulled her down beside him. "You do now." They sat like that until the stars came, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "You think we're done looking over our shoulders?" He glanced toward the dark horizon. "I think whatever was chasing us lost its grip." She tilted her face up. "Then we go forward. We go together," he said. He married her with Mabel and the preacher standing under the cottonwood tree, Franklin in his best shirt holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Zadie wore a dress she'd hemmed herself, pale blue, and Thayer stood beside her with his hair combed back and his hands steady as ever. They didn't ask for much: a shared name, a roof, a place to belong. And they got all of it. Years passed. Franklin grew into a tall boy with a dog that followed him everywhere and a way of walking that looked more like Thayer's than he'd admit. Zadie's garden grew full and wild, and Thayer built her a wooden swing beneath the same tree where they'd spoken their vows. They never spoke again of the men from the ridge. Whatever trail they'd taken, it led far from 3 Pines. And as for Thayer, he never left, not for a season, not for a ride that lasted longer than daylight. He had everything he'd once thought was beyond reach. Love that held quiet as stone, a boy who laughed without fear, and a woman who met him each morning with a touch that said, "You are mine." And he was, entirely.